There we go. Hello.
Sir, how are you?
I'm not gonna lie. This is surreal seeing you without "For the Love of Comics" behind
The
you in big
the
letters.
background, I know. I almost wanted to, but then I was just like, maybe I should just go all natural today.
No,
Looks
it's
like.
great. I love it.
Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing terrific. How about you today?
Good. I had to rush a little bit. I just got home, and so I'm gonna be eating at the same time. I'm starving, so
It doesn't bother
um.
me if it's not gonna bother anybody else. Don't worry about
All right,
it.
good. Yeah, that doesn't matter. Okay.
Well,
Cool. Cool. Cool.
thank you so
So yeah,
much. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here on this lovely August 28th, the birthday of Jack Kirby. The reason we're here today.
birthday of Jack Kirby. I love it. Yeah, of course. So thank you for doing this. This is all you, man. Like seriously, like you were the one putting all this together. You did this. You invited me on here. I really, really appreciate it. It's such a cool idea. Let's talk about it, man. I
Well,
love it.
yeah, you know what it is. It's always kind of been like a day that has some like pomp and circumstance around it for me because there's an organization which is where I got this shirt from, in New York called the Kirby Museum, and they do like events throughout the year, and they tend to be at Comic Cons in like the tri-state New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania area, and their
Mhm.
goal is to eventually actually have a physical museum for Jack Kirby where they can display art and just kind of have like a history of his life. But in the meantime, they've done a
It's
lot of
so
like,
crazy. It's so crazy they don't actually still have one.
right,
There isn't a Jack Kirby museum. Why isn't there an actual Jack Kirby museum?
right,
That
right.
doesn't make any sense to me at all. Like,
Or even a museum for like comic book art in general. You know what I mean? Like that
yeah,
the art form itself has now become so wide reaching and influential that it's shocking to me that no one has actually made a legitimate attempt at making a museum for comic books because I think it's long
no,
overdue at this point.
like a huge one. There is one. I currently live in. I was in Southern California, and now I live in more Northern California. There used to be. I forget if it's still there. There used to be a comic book art museum in San
Oh, really?
Francisco. But yeah, it was fairly small. They would have like big creators there. I went one time when Mike Magnolia was there,
Oh, wow,
doing stuff
nice.
for Hellboy. Yeah, it was really fun. It is rather small, but it has a lot. They encompass pretty much everything,
Right.
whether that be like comic book animation. So they have like comic like animation cells there, but then they have like full original pages from
Sure.
comics. Like there's a lot of cool. There was a lot of cool stuff there. Like you do like a monthly membership, and I was for a while, but they they didn't get enough funding for a little bit,
Oh,
and so
that's a
I think they
shame.
closed down for a little bit. I don't know where they're still there, but
Yeah.
yes, they need like an actual like huge comic book museum. Actually,
Right.
that would be phenomenal.
That would. It
I
really
think
would.
that'd be great.
Comics Kings is in the
Especially
chat.
one
What's
you
up,
could have
Comics
like a
Kings?
whole wing. They can have a whole wing to Jack Kirby. Like
Right.
that'd be
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah. At the very
Yeah.
least, he's very deserving of it. And they actually do a thing every year. Every year I miss it, and I'm so upset. But they do things like pop up exhibits. So like there were a couple years ago, throughout the whole month of August, they did a pop up exhibit
Mhm.
where they had this enlarged Kirby artwork on the walls that you could go in and see, and they had comic researchers and experts doing talks and things like that. Comics Kings is in the chat. What's up, Comics Kings? Apologies again for calling
Well,
you
man.
Comic X Kings the other day. I don't know what was going on there. But yeah, and they do a walking tour of the Lower East Side where they go to
Do they
like,
really?
yeah, they go through the neighborhood where Jack Kirby grew up, and they point out like, this was the hospital he was born in, and like this was the apartment building he grew up in. And it's really cool. But
That's so
I always
cool.
miss it every
That's so
year. Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I had to go to visit my parents today, so I'm at their home right now, and I couldn't go. So next year I'll have to make the time to go. But let's get to the topic at hand here.
Yeah,
What
let's
was
go for it.
what was for you your do you well I guess I should ask, do you have a memory of your first exposure to Jack Kirby?
I do, and it's actually like I didn't like it like at all. I couldn't understand the big draw. Like
Right.
I've been collecting comics since like late '80s, early
Hmm.
'90s,
Hmm.
and so like I was all through the '90s superhero craze. So like the
Sure.
big shoulder pad, like the intense like hardcore big metal suits kind of thing, like
Totally.
Nightfall Batman, right? Like
Right.
hardcore. Um, and so there was all that stuff, and so I was like, I couldn't really get behind Jack Kirby. Like I went to comic stores all the time, and I would talk to some of the the older patrons there and the older shop owners, and they would always try to recommend some of like his Silver Age stuff. Actually, the one they recommend most was Mr. Miracle to me, and eventually that became one of my favorites. And
Right.
but like you always try to be like, hey, from the stuff you like, try this. And like, no, man, no, this looks weird. Like, why is it all blocky? And I was a kid. Forgive my immaturity at the time, but like it was just such a crazy experience, and that I just couldn't understand it fully until I had like the
Sure.
full scope of what he did for comics as a whole.
Right.
Like I saw his work, and like I went to school for art for a little bit,
Oh,
and like
cool.
to be to try to be a fine artist for a little bit,
Mhm.
and I tried to do his like his style seems so simplistic, but
Yeah.
it's ridiculously complicated to mimic. Like it looks simple, but it's not. To pull it off, to make it seem like you're literally in the world with them. Like the
Right.
characters are literally popping out at you without being like the silly gimmicky 3D look. Like that's so much talent, and it brought a whole nother level to comic books, and I didn't really appreciate that at the time. So
Yeah,
I
and
thought that was
that's so funny that you say that, because I think that deceptively simple thing could certainly be said for a lot of the older Golden Age and Silver Age artists, where I think
totally.
there is a, I don't want to say obsession, because that sounds derogatory, but I think a lot of
Sure,
modern
sure.
a lot of modern comic book art really goes for realism, right? And with that realism, not all, but there is
Yeah,
a good
yeah,
amount of
yeah,
comic
yeah.
book artists like your Brian Hitches, for example, incredible artists, but there's so much minutia and detail in that, and people assume, well, if there's not as much minutia and detail, then it's not hard to do. But then you actually try to replicate
Yeah.
it, and it's so difficult. And I think for so much
Oh
of
yeah.
Kirby's art, it is expressionistic in the anatomical sense, in facial, in body. But then when you look at the machinery, when you look at the cosmic energy, when you look at all of the surrounding factors, that's where it becomes so rich and complex. It wasn't necessarily in facial features, but it was in the backgrounds and the world that he built around, which created that all-encompassing effect that you're talking about, that makes you feel like you're in it because it's so
Oh yeah.
large. And Tolliver
Oh,
in the chat
completely.
shouts out especially the Thing. Like, the Thing's a great example. He seems like such a simplistic character, but when you think about all the detail of every individual tile of rock that's on that character, and the way that even though he's literally rock, he's still expressive, is not easy to do.
Yeah, he literally made a rock. You could feel emotion from a rock. Like
Yeah,
that's ridiculous. People don't think about like they take that. I think a lot of people take that for granted. Like oh, it's the Thing. He's just this big Hulk like strong guy. But like you're feeling every emotion that
right,
this rock is
right.
giving you. Like like it's so amazing. And I love that you touched on the expression part of it, because that's one of the biggest things for me. The facial expressions
Right,
that Jack Kirby gives off, they really weren't a thing before that. Like
right.
it was very simplistic art. Like if you look back at a lot of, especially Golden Age comics, a lot of their expressions, especially if you're looking like a great example is Captain Marvel, old Shazam comics, right? Billy
Sure.
Batson when he's a kid, it was literally just black little circles, or Tintin, right? Or Tintin.
Right.
Like there was not very much expression in the face too much. And then Jack Kirby's like, you know what? That's stupid. Bam! Look at me now, kind of thing. And so like I loved that kind of aspect of it. You got to, first off, you felt like you're in the world, and then the next layer of it is that you're feeling everyone around you.
Right,
I
right.
think I think that's a really cool thing.
And that's a great trick that Kirby will do too, to emphasize that um, that empathy with the characters. Is he'll have whole panels that's
Yeah.
just a face or just eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just them
Yeah.
like looking directly at you. And again, nobody was doing that. It was
No.
such an unconventional thing for him to break the fourth wall, not in the Deadpool sense of the word, but I often
Oh yeah.
compare Kirby to Shakespeare, and that might feel like silly to some people, but there are a lot of parallels. And to me, those moments are like when a Shakespeare character will give a soliloquy, right, where they just look out
Mm-hmm.
to the audience and express their feelings. And that's what Kirby did in those moments, when like the Fantastic Four is all like looking out at the reader, talking about seeing Galactus in the distance. That's all
Yeah.
soliloquy and breaking the fourth wall.
No, it's really, I've never even thought about that kind of comparison before between Jack Kirby and William Shakespeare, but like yeah, Like that's a beautiful way to put it. Like the way like William Shakespeare used words in a totally different way than
Right,
before, right?
right,
Like William Shakespeare invented like a ridiculous amount of words,
right.
right, to express himself. Where Jack Kirby invented a whole new style of comic book art. Like that's a phenomenal
Right,
comparison. You should
right.
definitely quote that and put that on a shirt or something.
Well, and I think about the one of my favorite Jack Kirby lines is Darkseid talking to Glorious Godfrey, and he says, I might misquote it, but he says, "I am the Tiger Force at the heart of all things. When you cry out in your nightmares, it is Darkseid that you see." And I'm like, that could come from a Shakespeare play. That is so rich and voluminous. And Tolliver Street in my chat, I love what he wrote here. It's like he draws for the people in the nosebleeds, if that makes sense. There is volume in the images. Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah,
such a great way
yeah,
to put it.
completely.
It's the thing where it's like, it's a comic book. Why wouldn't you make it as big and bombastic as possible? If you're not limited by reality, embrace that. And I think that's what made him such a great artist and someone who I still think about and obsess over to this day.
Oh, I completely agree, and I think a lot of people do too. And I think more and more people, I don't know, are coming around to, not that everyone was against Jack Kirby, like I said, I was at the beginning. I think I was in the
Right.
vast minority actually. I think I was very much like one of the rare people that didn't understand him until later on. But I'm glad I did. I'm glad I was able to really catch on to him. Towards the late '90s when I really had grew my collection and had more of a wide berth of like reading material that I kind of went through. Once
Totally.
I gained a lot more stuff. But what I'm gonna throw the question right back at you then, man. What was your first experience with
So
and with Jack
yeah,
Kirby?
so I kind of had like a weird. So let me. I want to check something because I want to see something with our differences here. When did you like start reading comics? Because you're saying like '90s, so I'm assuming you're like in on the Rob Liefelds, the Todd McFarlanes, all those guys, right?
Of course, man. Jim Lee, Eric Larson,
Sure,
like
sure.
anyone that went to Image, anyone the founding members of Image, of course. Like yeah, it was like the late '80s, early '90s is when I kind of like
Right,
got my first inkling to comics. Like I was pretty young, but I mean I loved them. It was superhero
right.
stuff.
And I'm just mentioning he existed, Tolliver. Tolliver said, not you invoking Rob Liefeld. If I say it another time, he will appear, though. If you say it 3 times, he appears. Um,
I don't. Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. I'm happy to talk about, but
but even
it's a whole
those
nother conversation.
guys' styles are so different from Kirby. But I know that they certainly had respect for him, and I think for a lot of young kids reading comics at that time, like those were the big artists. So I think looking at something
Yeah.
like Kirby would probably feel very old fashioned. But my entry point to Kirby was more through the Bruce Timm cartoons because when the
Oh,
in the Superman the animated series, obviously Darkseid
yeah.
and the New Gods play a big role, but the first time I think I ever remember seeing the name Jack Kirby was in the Superman the animated series episode where Darkseid kills Dan Turpin. And for those of you who might be
Wow.
watching who never saw that show, they deliberately modeled Dan Turpin, who was a Metropolis detective that Jack Kirby created for the New Gods comics. They deliberately drew Dan Turpin to look like Jack Kirby. Like
Yeah.
he's
I remember that
designed.
exact episode. I
Yes,
remember that episode. Yeah, yeah.
yes. And Darkseid has that great line where he's like, "If I had known one human's death would have upset you so much, I would have killed more." But
Yeah. Oh,
he kills Dan
Darkseid.
Turpin, and there's like this beautiful funeral scene for him, and the episode ends with a dedication to Jack Kirby because the episode aired shortly after his death. Um, and that was the first time I ever saw that name. I'm like, who is this? And it wasn't until many years later when I actually started getting into comics because I didn't really get into comics until the mid 2000s. The first comics I ever
Yeah.
bought monthly were Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men. So even though I grew up,
Solid choice, sir.
my
Yeah.
expectations were set high for the rest of my life. But even though I was a '90s kid, I didn't ever
Yeah.
really read the Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane stuff until much later in my life. So
Totally.
seeing Kirby's art, I was like, oh, this is Bruce Timm. This is where Bruce Timm gets it from. Um,
Okay.
and
Okay.
and
And
especially
kind of, yes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So angular, right? I think he has a lot more fluidity than Kirby does, which I think is necessary for being an animator. But it's
Sure.
like very clearly there. And
Yeah.
I loved the New Gods from the Superman show. So my first Kirby stuff that I really read, because I was more of a DC kid, was the omnibuses that they put out in the 2000s of that were like, it was all the Fourth World stuff. So it was like an issue of Jimmy Olsen, then Forever People, then New Gods, then Mr. Miracle, and it would rotate. So you like actually got to read it in the chronological order that it came out. And I just
That's
like
awesome.
was obsessed from there because my local library had them. So I took those out and just read them over and over. And I adored them. That is really like how I got into it. So yeah, that was my exposure.
I mean, I love that your comparison to Bruce Timm as well. Like especially everyone that kind of went for it. And yes, what you were talking about with like the 90s artist craze, really kind of really rebelling. They were kind of like the bad boys of comic art at the time, right?
Yeah.
They were really rebelling against the very traditional standards that that Kirby kind of fathered in a way of like the Silver Age kind of movement of comics. Even though Kirby definitely started in Golden Age comics, but you didn't really kind of start to see his style until really he came to Marvel, right?
Right.
And so
the later half of like Fantastic Four in particular and Thor and stuff, that's where he really becomes as we know him. And I would
Kirby we know of.
And I would even say I said this on a TikTok the other day, and I talked about this with Dave Baker yesterday, but I think you can track the history of comics through Jack Kirby's career, because he's either not maybe the trend starter, but the perfecter of trends, or he's starting trends. You know what I mean? Like he's not the creator of the superhero, but he creates Captain America, who's one of the biggest superheroes of all time, right?
But even that was just like that was. Let's talk about that. Like his Captain America comic was like a huge deal because it was a big like kind of like, not to be crass or anything, but it was a pretty big middle finger to not only what was going on in the war, but also the United States government at the time too. Like, why aren't you getting involved? Why are we not getting involved right now? This is ridiculous, because it came out before our entry into the war, the United States entry into the World War II, and so people looking back on it, I think, don't really realize that. They're like, oh, cool, it was just America propaganda. No, we were trying to get into it. He was trying to send a message. He was trying to send a message to everybody. Go, listen, this is something we need to talk about. This is something that people need to get on. And using the medium of comic books and using the vehicle of superheroes in particular to show that you have someone to get behind. Like, you might feel lost, you might feel small, but you're not. We have someone to get behind. Believe in this. And I love that. I thought
and addressing political issues. Like, you certainly have that in some of the old Siegel and Schuster Superman books, where there's lots of political commentary in those, where Superman like will beat up a slumlord, or there's like one where he stops arms dealers who are like arming a dictator. That's there, but theirs is much more allegorical. And Kirby and Simon, which we got to give credit to Joe Simon too, who collaborated who collaborated with Kirby on Cap. But they were unafraid to tackle a real world issue very head on with a real political figure of the time period. And yeah, your point is so true that like people look back on it now and think of it as propaganda, when in reality it was much more radical. And they got flack for it. They got hate for it. There's that famous story where some American Nazis showed up at Timely Comics, threatened to beat up Jack Kirby. And Jack, put out his cigar, went downstairs to go kick the shit out of them, but they were gone by the time he got there. So it didn't happen.
Love that story.
I'm like, he definitely would have won that fight too, for sure.
Oh yeah, hard. Yeah, not even a question. But it was great. Like what they were really doing back then, and then like going from something like that, and then starting Marvel in a way with and then going from Simonson to Stan Lee, right? Then we move on to his next biggest contributor with team with Stan Lee having like, besides Bendis, speaking of Ultimate Spider-Man, besides Bendis and Bagley breaking their record, they held the longest creative team run for decades. Right? For decades. Because usually that's people don't think about that, but that's a very common thing in comics where you get a creative team to start, but one of them leaves or both of them leaves, but the book continues because these are timeless characters, right? So they have to continue. But Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, like these were their like children. This is something like especially Fantastic Four, like that was something that they were ridiculously passionate about, and they stuck with it for a very long time.
Absolutely, 100 issues. Yeah. And legendary. I feel like is almost an understatement, because when you look at the amount of characters and concepts and ideas that came out of that run, it's like it's absurd to see that batting average of just like hit after hit after hit after hit. You basically have you got like Galactus, those 3 issues, then like 2 issues later Black Panther shows up, and that's
Silver
Surfer, Doctor Doom,
the
Inhumans. It's all there in that run, not to mention the multiple villains that they face besides Doctor Doom. Like, there is so much that comes out of just that one run of comics that builds the foundation for everything we know about Marvel today.
I gotta say, Dimitri from the Geek Show is just saying that we're our 2 favorite people. You're one of our favorite people.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe on his last episode with you, he said he doesn't play favorites. So I smell hypocrisy here, Dimitri.
No, he never plays favorites.
Absolutely. Yeah, interesting.
He wouldn't do it. No, awesome. But thank you for dropping by.
Yeah,
Dimitri, this is phenomenal.
And continuing with that, the history of Kirby, you can see the history of comics. That book is, along with the DC revivals of the Flash and Green Lantern. Those 3 are the Silver Age. That's the start of the Silver Age right there.
That's Silver.
But
that speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Their work is what started the Silver, right? That's huge. Like, there's obviously a huge difference between before their work and after their work.
Absolutely.
Like, that says something.
Yeah.
Like, that says.
Absolutely. And that collaboration and that time, evolves into something that is just so influential, monumental for both artists, writers, whoever it may be, across the board. I think that I want to ask you this question. So let's talk a little bit about the idea of the Marvel method, right? Like the method of how they wrote their comics.
Sure.
How they wrote their comics and how they sort of evolved together, where you have Stan Lee, whoever he was collaborating with. Usually it was Jack Kirby, but there was also collaborating with Steve Ditko on your Doctor Stranges and your Spider-Mans. The way it really worked was, it wasn't like how it is today, where you usually have a writer who sits down at a computer, types out a script, sends it off, and then the artist draws. The methodology was the writer and the artist got together, came up with an idea, the artist drew it, gave it back to Stan. Stan then kind of filled in, based on notes and things like that from the artists that were usually in the margins, what the dialogue was going to be, and then the comic came out. So there was, a much more collaborative process than there really was. And I don't know, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the whole controversy there, I guess you could say.
In theory, like, especially if you take the Marvel way of writing comics, like, if you take it and apply it now, I think it would be immensely beneficial. I think, in my personal opinion, I think a lot of right now we have like professional writers doing this. Like, back in the Gold and Silver Age, like they were marketing people, like they were business people that were writing for these things.
Yeah.
Like, Stan Lee was a huge, like, he was a businessman. Yeah. Stan Lee and like Bob Kane for Batman. Ridiculously impressive, right? And like, but you notice that then the artists who actually contributed a lot more to the story than just drawing the picture, like, they developed the feel of the character, they developed what the character is going to look like, and what we see when we think of these characters is the artist that did it, and they would essentially make the paneling story so we see the progress of the story through the artist's eye, not necessarily really the writer's eye. So if we take that and put it in now, because right now, like you mentioned, most of them are sitting in their own home offices, writers by themselves, and we get more professional writers. We get these amazing stories, right? We get these such deep and layered stories nowadays than we did before,
right?
And because we have these professional writers sitting down and actually doing some writing, like that's their skill. But I think we lose a little bit of that collaboration. I think we lose a little bit, especially between the books. Like, I mean,
Right.
especially like current ongoing stories, especially with the big two. Like, you don't need this with the independent books like Image and Dark Horse and Boom and stuff like that, because there's no like
Right.
shared
Right.
universe really. But Marvel and DC, uh, Marvel's, I mean, they both would benefit immensely to something like this.
For sure.
There's definitely more collaboration between everybody, at least in my opinion, because it just seems like everyone's so in their own little bubbles, you know?
Right. Right.
And so nothing like I personally go to Marvel DC for like a shared universe. I like the side stories. I like
Right.
like the Elseworld kind of stories. Like I know Killing Joke is now mainstream. It's in continuity, but it wasn't before. And so
Right.
like these kind of Elseworld stories where you can like take a lot of liberties, and that's amazing. I like that, but I also come from the shared universe, and I think we lose a lot of that. And I think that was a good idea that Stan Lee had in the fact that you're collaborating with everybody, but
Right.
at the same time, we don't do that anymore. So
Right, right.
I
Well,
think
Dimitri in my chat here said Stan Lee, aka Funky Flashman. So giving a shout out to Jack Kirby's dig at Stan Lee in the Mr. Miracle comics. But I think that idea of that distinction between writer and artist is somewhat detrimental to comics in some ways when we talk about them. In the sense of, I think that sometimes people will dump all of the credit onto the writer and none of the credit onto the artist, which I think is deeply unfair, because comic books are inherently a visual medium, and more so than even film, where you have, a direct, like when you talk about film, directors always get the credit. And it's like, okay, to an extent I can understand that, because the director is the one who points the camera, right? They're the ones who direct the actors. They have so much control over what's going on, versus comics where I could write something that's a pile of puke, but if I have a good artist, it could be Eisner Award winning. You know what I mean? That can elevate
totally.
something so much. And I think that
Completely.
you said that we don't really do that most recently, but what I've actually noticed is, I've noticed this more in Marvel books than DC books, but maybe I just haven't noticed this. But I've noticed in a lot of Marvel books, sometimes you open it when you look at the credits, instead of listing like, I noticed this on the Wade and Samney Daredevil. Instead of saying Mark Waid writer, Chris Samney artist, it said Mark Waid and Chris Samney storytellers, which I really kind of like as accreditation.
That is I haven't been noticing that, but I definitely haven't noticed it on the DC stuff. Yeah, that's definitely more of a Marvel thing right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look more. Like, I want to see if the rest of them do that.
It's not always. It's not always. So what I'm wondering, if I'm seeing that, I wonder if it's like maybe they're doing something slightly more Marvel method when you see that, especially with like Wade and Samney, who are on that Daredevil book forever. I'm sure it got to a point where they were being a lot more collaborative with the storytelling and things like that. And Dimitri pointed out that the Black Widow book that they did together, I remember seeing it in that specifically too, because Samney really had a co-writing credit in that one. But Dimitri, you are right. It was in both of those that I saw that. But I think of that credit and I was like, you know what? If I could go back in time, I would tell Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko, that's how you credit your comics. Put storytellers, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, or Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, because I think that would have solved so many issues that they had together.
We got a shout out from Shooby Dubert. Hey man,
what's up, Shooby Dubert?
Thank you for dropping by. You're amazing, man. Keep up your stuff. But no, I completely agree, because I mean I know we're talking about Jack Kirby, but they were around the same time with was it Bob Kane and Bill Finger with Batman? Like how like that was ridiculously tragic. How no one even realized how much.
Yeah.
What we know of Batman is Bill Finger.
Yeah.
Like not
100%,
Bob Kane.
100%.
Like, I mean, we wouldn't have had Batman without Bob Kane. That's for sure.
Sure.
But like what we know of Batman, that's Bob Kane. But to your bigger point is like, yes, they're a team. Like the writer usually gets the top spot, unfortunately, and that's what people like Bill Finger and Jack Kirby usually went to the wayside for a very, very long time.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a great documentary out there. I don't know if you've seen it, but I'm recommending it for anybody who's watching. I think it's on Hulu. It's called Batman and Bill, and it's about Bill Finger, and it really digs into the real just like tragedy of how much Bill Finger got screwed over in terms of like the credit that he lost out on for creating the character of Batman as we know him today, whether it's the costume design, Commissioner Gordon, supporting cast members, villains, etc. He lended so much to the Batman mythos, and without him, people wouldn't love Batman as much as they do if it hadn't been for him. And Dimitri said something in the chat that I'm gonna parrot here, mentioning the egos of storytelling all over media. Yeah, and I don't want to call Stan Lee an egomaniac, but he was someone who had a big personality, and Jack Kirby didn't. Jack Kirby was much more of a recluse, incredibly intelligent, incredibly creative, but he was quiet. And Steve Ditko was a misanthrope. He hated people and would have preferred to just stay inside and draw. So because of that, it was kind of inevitable that Stan Lee's big personality would overtake both of them.
But that's very true. The thing I loved, all the stories I hear of Jack, circling back around to our topic, the stories I keep hearing about Jack Kirby personality-wise, like, yeah, he stayed inside a lot. He was very at his house quite a bit. But if someone just went over to his house, he would invite you in and talk to you for hours.
Totally.
Hours and hours about comics and things like that. And just like, I love that. You can tell, like, I'm a huge, I gravitate a lot towards people with passions and I love to know about people's passions.
Sure.
And I very much identify with that because I can tell that he did too. And he loved to talk about his.
Yeah.
And he loved the medium of comics. And you could tell, like, even to the very end of his life, that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
That's what he was doing.
Yeah.
And he was drawing comic books. I mean, Bill Finger and not Bill Finger, Bob Kane and Stan Lee, those guys, they got huge, and they were huge in the comic book industry. But towards the end, I mean, even Stan Lee would do a comic here or there, but like, you could tell they moved on a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily from their stardom, but like their lives had moved on in the comic book industry, and their roles had evolved. Where the artists, like, that's where they live, man.
Yeah.
Like, that's their home, and I love that. I think that's phenomenal, and they definitely deserve a lot more credit than a lot of them get.
Absolutely. And then you have, continuing kind of going through his career in total, after being at Marvel for a good chunk of time in the 60s, Kirby, Kirby gets fed up with the fact that he is not getting the proper accreditation that he deserves. He's not getting the proper payment that he deserves, and he makes the famous defection over to DC Comics. So I wanted to pose this question to you. What do you see as like the biggest distinction between Kirby at Marvel and Kirby at DC?
I think first off, I love comparing the two. I really do. His Marvel, like, as much as like it's his style, like you can tell that it's a Kirby book on either Marvel or DC.
Sure.
But you can tell the difference in here. This Marvel, he had heart. Like, his characters had heart, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't huge. Like, I mean, you had like universe spanning stories like with like Galactus and Silver Surfer, but like there wasn't like that big story wise. Like, each character was so drawn and thought out, and had like characters were extremely layered, and you identified with each of these characters, right? Especially with when he did the Thing, Black Panther, and the Inhumans and things like that. Like, they all had this like level of heart to them. And not saying that the DC ones didn't, but when he went over to DC, he had this. I think he was just letting loose.
Totally.
Right? Like, he was just. This is the world. Like, this is the universe. Here, welcome to my universe, everybody. Like, welcome.
Yeah.
And like, it was so expansive what he did with the Fourth World stuff. Like, it was so crazy what and not even the Fourth World, but he also touched on the magic with the demon as well when he was doing his demon stuff.
Right.
And so he built these like. First off, he built the Fourth World from nothing. There was nothing like that before Kirby. That was Kirby. Yeah. And then you had the demon and this magic. Like, DC had magic characters, but like nothing compared to what opened up from the demon. Which a lot of what characters like writers like Alan Moore, like when he was writing his Swamp Thing, like a lot of his like magic based characters, he was basing off this big magical world that Jack Kirby created from here on out. And so we get those amazing like indie feel comics like Sandman, Hellblazer, Swamp Thing from the 80s, from the foundation of what Kirby built from the magic world, just from this one book, just from Demon. Like, because you get the Witch Boy in there as well, and starting this big huge world, and but then his massive expansion with Fourth World, with Allfather, Orion, Big Barda, Mr. Miracle, like Darkseid, like you get DC's villain, and then
Right.
at the same time you get Marvel's villain. Like, see, that's the thing. Like, because of Jack Kirby wasn't even at Marvel, you get Marvel's big villain.
Thanos.
Because that
You're
was the
referring to
inspiration.
Thanos. Yes, yes.
I'm
Yeah,
referring
yeah,
to Thanos. I'm
yes.
referring to Thanos. Right? Obviously, Jack Kirby didn't create Thanos, but that was
Right.
their
I mean,
inspiration.
you just
And
look
so
at them and you're like, that's Darkseid, clearly. And I think Jim Starlin has
that's
openly been
Darkseid.
like, yeah, this was me doing my homage to Kirby with that.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And that's such a great point because what I find what I find so interesting about that is it really shows the level of impact that Kirby had as a creator because he comes
Oh,
into
totally.
DC at a point where they've got what we've got 3 decades worth of history, right? They've
Yeah.
got three, let's say it, three of the biggest superheroes: Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, right? The Trinity. And he comes in and is like, here you go. This is going to be your greatest villain for the next 5 decades.
He just
And
walks in. Here you
yeah,
go.
you're welcome. And it's so funny too because at the time, people are like, "What is this garbage? We're never talking about this again." And now we've got multi-million-dollar movies with fucking Darkseid in them. Like
I know.
he's everywhere. He is their ultimate evil, and it was something that was so unappreciated in its time.
I agree. One of the people on my chat, Kyron, he's one of my favorite local artists in my community.
Mm,
He's an amazing artist. So, Kyron, if you're still on, please comment on some of your perspective on Jack Kirby as an artist
mm.
and like how he inspired you, and if at all, or if you didn't, if you just didn't like it at all, please any opinion is fine. We're talking to Jack Kirby. That doesn't mean everyone has to be loving him at all. If you find his art terrible, please let me know. I would love to know too. I want to talk about that. So. Give us your perspective. But yes, dude, like he created the villains. Like he even created Doctor Doom. Jack Kirby created the big bads of both Marvel and DC.
Yeah,
Like he really did.
yeah,
I mean, he influenced the big bad definitely of Thanos, but he definitely created Doctor Doom as well.
yeah.
And so like he created these big amazing villains to counteract the heroes. Right? It was phenomenal.
Right, absolutely. And that the New Gods to me is like that's my favorite Kirby stuff. Because it purely first of all, like just on an artistic level, stunning work. Like, but that's obvious. Like Jack Kirby's art is great, water is wet. We know, we get that. But I think that
Yeah.
what people don't appreciate is just how ambitious that project was. Like if like tomorrow well, I shouldn't say Grant Morrison because Grant Morrison basically did this, but like you really take a step back and say Jack Kirby was like, I want 4 distinct titles that are all going to be following different characters, but they all tie into this universe where I'm inventing an entirely new pantheon of gods, essentially. And
Yeah.
and like if Grant Morrison did that, we'd all be like, yeah, Grant Morrison would do that because they kind of did that with Seven Soldiers, right? They created this like similar thing, a series of miniseries. But that's Grant Morrison. Like this is not something the average comic creator can do and pull off. And for a long time, Kirby was pulling it off. He was doing it. He was doing an amazing job with that. So the ambition of that project is so huge and fascinating to me. And that aspect of it, I think, is underappreciated as well. But I want to get into specifically something you were talking about the other day when you brought up Jack Kirby and Mr. Miracle in particular. You were talking about kind of like the themes of Mr. Miracle in terms of the triumph of good over evil and the way our sort of like lives, the nature versus nurture affects us. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I have some thoughts on that I agree with you 100%, and I wanted to
Yeah,
build
no,
on
no,
that
sure,
with you.
yeah. I would love to hear your thoughts too on it. That's it's a fascinating kind of tie into it because the reason I really love Mr. Miracle, and to get some backstory on some people that don't know, Mr. Miracle is Allfather's son, right? And so they had to switch. Darkseid and Allfather are at war, right? They're at war for eons, and so they finally come up with a deal of peace. And to do that, they switch sons. So Mr. Miracle, Scott Free, grows up on this death hell world, right?
Mm-hmm.
All his life, and he's tortured, but he never gives up. Like that.
Yeah.
That's really his biggest power
Right.
of Scott Free is yeah, he can escape anything. And how do you do that? You just don't give up. You keep trying until you escape. Like that, he learns all this stuff. And so just that persistence, that heart, and that never give up attitude, kind of like, first off, speaks to Kirby, right? Like
Absolutely.
it speaks to exactly who he was as a human being and what he truly believed in as well. And showing that good, no matter what, will break through. That you can live forever on a planet that is erupting with fire every 10 seconds. Like, and you still will find love. You find even good and love because he found Big
Yeah.
Barda.
Yeah.
He found Big Barda. He fell in love. He found love on this hell world, right? If
Right.
anyone can
Right.
do it, Mr. Miracle can. So
Right.
I think that was such a beautiful story.
Absolutely. I want to give a shout out to 1407 Gray Malkin in the chat here. He's saying, hey, how's it going? Then they also mentioned Joe Casey did a really good Jack Kirby homage during a cable run in the mid 90s. I don't think I've ever seen that. I'll have to check that out. I'm envisioning now Jack
Yeah.
Kirby drawing Cable, and it's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. It's kind of like breaking my brain.
So many shoulder
The
pads.
pouches would just be insane.
So many. They'll be jumping out of you.
But I wanted to say that I love everything you're saying about Mr. Miracle. I agree with it 100%. And then on the flip side of that, the same story, not the same story, but the same thematic idea is also presented with Orion. Because Orion is the son of Darkseid. He's brought to New Genesis. And I remember reading the Pact, and the first thing that happens when like Orion is brought to New Genesis, he's like feral, and he tries to like attack and kill Highfather, and Highfather just like stops him, but he's like, I'm not giving up on you. Like I believe that you can be better than the circumstances that you were raised in. So you have this nature versus nurture thing going on with both Mr. Miracle and Orion, and Kirby's ultimate thesis is no matter what, good will triumph. Like you can be thrown into the most hellish place, and you can, like you said, you can find love, you can find hope. And on the flip side of that, you could be born into the most hellish thing, and you can rise above those surroundings that you were born into. You can rise above the thing that you were thrown into against your will if you can find a good support system, if you can find people who will love you. And it's like, I'm like getting emotional thinking about it, but it's, when people look at Kirby and they're like, oh, you know, he's like very overwritten, like the common criticisms of like, it's not that deep, it's like just like very cheesy and corny. It's like, no, there is a very primal emotional idea of the capacity for good in human beings in these stories that I think is so undervalued. So when I heard your TikTok talking about that Mr. Miracle thing, I was like, yes, you get it. You get what he was going for.
I completely agree. Yeah, what you were saying is 100% true. Also, real quick, Kairos, Kirby pouches, so dynamic. I agree. That would be so crazy, Kirby pouches. And Mr. Dismas, yes, Kirby is king. I agree. Thank you. I love your content as well, man. And Kyron has also said he named his son's middle name, his kid's middle name is Orion.
I love that.
Because of Kirby. So there you go. That's so cool.
That kid's gonna
I didn't know that.
ass.
Well done. That's so cool.
Great Malcolm in the chat. I think they came in late when we, like right at the end of your talk about Mr. Miracle. Did Darkseid show affection for his ward? No, because his ward was scot-free, Mr. Miracle. He threw him into the X pits of the Armageddon. And he basically left him to Granny Goodness's orphanages and named him scot-free, ironically, as a joke, because he kept trying to escape over and over, which is how he became a master escape artist. That's harsh. Yeah, that's Darkseid for you. Because Darkseid's whole thing is a mockery of hope, right? Like Darkseid, I always get frustrated when people make Darkseid into a big dude who you fight, because Darkseid is like an existential horror. He is a mockery of freedom and love and hope. He is just like despair incarnate. And you can't ever truly defeat him because of that.
No, that's his point. He wants to find the anti-life equation to take away freedom. Like he is the end. Like he is the end goal of horror. Like he's not just someone that Superman goes up and punches all the time. That's not Darkseid. I mean, he can. They can go at it all day. But like the point of Darkseid is to be the antithesis of good. That's the whole point of All Father and Darkseid, right? And I do love when writers get into All Father's like negative points as well.
Sure.
So, like, but having that kind of like literal line in the sand, good versus evil, and then the things that they influence is the story, right?
Right.
Like you get Mr. Miracle and Barda. The things that Darkseid influences, Orion, the Lightwave, the things Lightray, the things that Allfather influences, right? That's the story. What
Right.
good it influences evil, and what we're doing with it in the universe, and how we're using it. Like
That's so true.
that's
Yeah.
that's the story.
Which I think is like, I think that's unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, I like Orion and Lightray a lot, but I love Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. And I think part of the reason for that is because that story arc of them having to overcome the evil of their surroundings tends to be more compelling for people than Orion and Lightray, who have much more Orion, I should say, who has a much more internal struggle where he's like, am I the evil of my true father, or can I be better than that? Yeah, that's. I think that speaking of like, Superman can punch him, but it can't like be the end all be all. Going back to the Bruce Timm Superman, I love the final episode of the series where Darkseid has brainwashed Superman, and Superman beats him up and like punches him and like throws him off the tower. And there's like all the slaves of Apocalypse, and Superman's like, you're free now, you can do with him what you will. And the slaves of Apocalypse like turn to Darkseid and like pick him up and like gently like help him back into his castle. And this line always sticks with me because to me this is like perfect Darkseid adaptation. He says, I am many things, Kal-El, but here I am God. And they bring him in. It's like, that's just it. You can punch him as much as you want. At the end of the day, what makes Darkseid who he is lurks within human beings. That doubt, that capacity for hate, that capacity for fear, that is what Darkseid is. And you can't punch that.
It's just personified. It's just personified.
Right.
Like
right.
That's what it is. It's not something you can get rid of. And so you can't beat Darkseid. Like you can keep him at bay, and that's what Superman does, right? Like that's the point of Superman, and which in turn it symbolizes the point of hope. That's what hope does, because that's what Superman is, right? Having hope there is what keeps all that negativity away, and the darkness at bay. So that's the real message of it. Like, yes, at the very surface, that's what I love about it. You can enjoy it at every level. The surface level, right? You have the punching and fighting and superheroes with their capes and stuff, fighting the bad guy. That's phenomenal. That's really good. You can enjoy that. But as we dissect it a little further, like, it's just a beautiful story all around. All of them.
Yeah.
When it comes to either Darkseid or it comes to back to his Marvel stuff with Fantastic Four, even Devil Dinosaur. Like, even Devil Dinosaur. Like, it's phenomenal. I love it. It literally is. That one's one of my favorite books.
That's,
it is.
Yeah. Right. One last point I want to make on New Gods. Now let's talk more about Devil Dinosaur and the 70s Marvel stuff. But Gray Malkin said, every time I think of Darkseid, I just think, this is bad, very, very bad. Yeah, no, 100%. That's exactly what Kirby wanted you to feel. But I have to give
That's what you should be feeling right there. Right. This is not good. It's not good.
I have to give a shout out to Grant Morrison because I think they are one of the few writers who captures a lot of what Kirby was going for with Rock of Ages and the Darkseid is statement, right? Because that is exactly what we're talking about. Like, Darkseid is not something that is physical. He just is. And he always will be because of that. So I just always loved that statement. Let's talk about 70s Kirby and Kirby.
Sure, let's talk about 70s Kirby.
Devil Dinosaur is a blast, and I was so glad you gave Devil Dinosaur a shout out in your video. What is it? What was your first interaction with Devil Dinosaur? Why do you love that one so much?
Well, I just seriously it was such a cool artistic take, and they're like, let's just make the dinosaur bright red. Like, let's make the T-Rex bright red and see what happens. And like, just from our artistic point of view, right? You have this bright red dinosaur, the main cover with a really light blue background, right? So the dinosaur is really popping out at you. And then you have this little monkey boy on the top of his head, and something's going on. And that seems interesting. And like, it really is just Devil Dinosaur and Moon Boy going through their land and trying to just take out these monsters whenever they get, whenever they're trying to get up in their face. And like, it is a very simple story, but at the end of the day, it's just about these two buddies trying to like survive in this chaotic world. Yeah. Right. And they're different because Moon Boy is different from his. That's why Devil Dinosaur saves him. Right, because he was about to be killed by his people because he's different, and so is Devil Dinosaur, right? He's bigger than normal. He's a bigger than normal T-Rex, and he's bright red, and he's different, and he's smarter too. Devil Dinosaur is actually extremely smart, and so like them together, just like the oddballs together surviving and being friends and
Right.
it's a simple story, but I love it. I like this a
Right.
lot. But
Right.
initially, yes, that's what caught me was just the artistic. Again, Kirby, the artistic decision to make that cover just so uh, dynamic. It was really
Yeah,
really cool.
absolutely, absolutely. And he's doing the classic like foreshortening art where the dinosaur's like
Oh yeah, totally.
anatomically it doesn't quite look right, but it looks like it's leaping out of the
No,
cover right at you. That 3D effect you were talking about earlier. Gray Malkin said, "Why
yeah.
isn't that a kids' cartoon? It reminds me of Adventure Time." Well, so I actually learned this from Dave Baker yesterday. The origin of that comic was that they were essentially trying to create books that they could shop around to potentially become cartoons. So that book was like Kirby being like, all right, this is me like putting together a pitch for one of these potential cartoon shows, because it really does feel like something that should have been a show. And now, of course,
Oh yeah.
we are getting the more contemporary version, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur by Amy Reeder and Brendan Fletcher. I believe that's their names. So shout out to them because
Yeah,
they created
with it,
that concept.
totally. Yeah, Shooby Doober was just. I was just about to mention that he was commenting about that. He's like, I can't wait for the Moon Girl Devil Dinosaur Disney Plus series. I
Yeah.
can't either. First off, Moon Girl is smartest person in Marvel Comics universe. That's a fact. So we can lay that out. But yeah, it was a kid. It was meant to be for an all ages book, and that's what I think. I mean, it's not that I get like um uh upset at it. It's just like a lot of these books are all ages. Like adults
Yeah.
can enjoy
Yeah.
them, but also kids. Like that was an important part. Like Devil
Absolutely.
Dinosaur, anyone can read Devil Dinosaur and enjoy it when it was first made. Like that was the point of it. And so it's just a really fun, silly book. And I love what came out of it. Like what they're doing with Devil Dinosaur with Moon Girl really took the character and really dove into the fact that this is a kid's thing, right? This is a
Yeah.
kid's thing.
Yeah, and I think Jack Kirby is also a great artist for young people who are just getting into comics, because his visual art style is so distinct that you can look at him and recognizably be like, that's a Jack Kirby art piece. Like, you, as you read more and
Oh
you
yeah,
learn more
yeah.
about comics, you're like, okay, I'm starting to recognize the things about these artists, but he is so distinct that you're like, that's Jack Kirby. I know exactly who that is. That
That's
is
exactly.
Jacob Kurtzberg himself.
It's true though. Like,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, because no one's kind of like mimicked his style, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
you can tell when an artist is influenced by someone quite a
Yes.
bit, like right, they call him like an artist clone kind of thing,
Sure.
like he's a Jim Lee clone or he's a whatever clone, like because they are influenced so much, you can see where their influence came from, right? You're like, oh yeah, he loved Jim Lee, he copied his art, but Jack Kirby, like I said, is very difficult to copy in general and his style. So people might have gotten influence from like his stylistic choices, but
Right.
like actually his line works kind of thing. It's just all him. It's
Right.
really it's all him.
So on that note, what do you feel like, we were talking about the distinction between him going from Marvel to DC. Do you then also see a distinction of him returning to Marvel in the 70s when he does his truly buck wild Captain America run, where we get like Armin Zola for the first time? Then you've also
Yeah.
got you've got Devil Dinosaur, as we mentioned. We've got the 2001: A Space Odyssey stuff, and then of course we've got Eternals, which I'd like to talk to about a little bit at some point. But what do you feel like is the distinction when he comes back? Is there a distinction, like stylistically, artistically? Like, what do you notice about the shift there?
Yeah, I think he was demonstrating his range at
Mm,
that point when he's coming back. He went because Captain America is vastly different from his Eternals, which is vastly different from his Devil
sure.
Dinosaur, which is like Captain America is a very centralized story. His Captain America is a very much about Cap's journey and going through like his different villains. Where Eternals is a universe expanding kind of book, just very similar to what he did with Fourth World, but a little toned down. But
Yeah.
like he was really demonstrating what he can do. Right?
Yeah.
Marvel, he was starting something. He knew something was happening, something was special here, and he was taking it very seriously. And this is what we needed to do. Went over to DC. He's like, I was very contained at Marvel. I'm just explode of creativity here. And then coming back to Marvel, he's just I can do whatever I want. I have so many
Right,
different ideas. I can do it,
right.
and he does it. Like it was, it's such a he's such a breadth of different creative work when, especially it's definitely at Marvel for sure.
That's such a good point. I hadn't considered it that way, but that like the explosion of creativity he gets from DC, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. So then he comes to Marvel, and it's
Nope.
him just being like, "All right, like this is me now. I'm a little bit more wild than I was when I left, so this is what it's going to be, and we're going to just roll
Yeah.
with it. You're going to have to deal with it." Uh, 1407 Gray Malkin in the chat asked an interesting question: would Kirby survive in this current market? I don't know if I can answer that because Jack Kirby in the Jenga tower of comic books is like such an important piece on the base
Yeah.
that I think if I tried to imagine comic books without him and then putting him in present day, the whole thing would just collapse. I literally
It really would.
cannot imagine comics as they exist now without Jack Kirby. So I don't want to say like no he couldn't, but at the same time, comics would be so radically different than they are current. Okay. So you're saying he goes Doc Brown. So he existed, time travels, comes back, and starts drawing again. Okay, so that's an interesting question. I'm gonna
Sure.
say, what do you think about this question? Like, if we by some miracle of miracles, Kirby returned and was like, I'm back to write and draw more comics. How do you think people would
This is a
react?
cool question. This is a cool question. So throw it to that the person that said that. This is a really cool question. First, I would like to also touch on it real quick though. Like, yes, Jack Kirby is one of the fundamentals. He's one of like I would say he's one of like this like a couple pillars of modern day comics for sure. Because we have
Definitely.
like Steve Ditko as well, Steranko, Neil Adams as well over at DC,
Mm-hmm.
Herb Trimpe over at Marvel as well. Like some of these amazing like gold and silver age artists like really influenced what artists came in today. But yes, I completely agree. And to answer the question, I would love to see a modern day Jack Kirby book. I think I would love to see an independent. I would love to see an
Sure,
Image or a Boom Jack Kirby book. I
sure.
think that would be so cool. Like his style, like there's such a broad range of artists now that publishing their own work. First off, it's easier than ever to publish your own comic books,
Definitely.
and so artists nonstop. So we get such a variety of different styles, and so I think he would feel right at home. Like
Yeah.
I think so. Like I think knowing what we know of his personality and how much he loved to talk about this stuff and really kind of dive into it, I think he would be just ridiculously over the moon
Right.
excited to start different pieces of work. I think
I
it'd be
think
great.
I think
What about you,
he
man? What do you think?
I do agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that he would be successful for a couple of reasons. First being he is I don't want to say he's appreciated now more than ever because that to me suggests like we've reached the apex. I will never think that we've reached the apex of Jack Kirby appreciation. Like until we are
No,
at the level of cultural awareness excuse me, until the level of cultural awareness between Stanley and Jack Kirby is at least equal, I will never
at
think
least.
that Kirby is fully
No,
appreciated.
completely agree.
But
100%.
but when you look back at part of what happened in the 70s is that people kind of thought Kirby was over and people being like the comic readers, right? People kind of thought Kirby was over the hill. He was so different from his peers that it was like weird to people. Nobody really appreciated it. One of my followers, one of my mutuals, I remember them saying in one of my comments was like he kind of thought of Vincent Van Gogh, like someone who like was not appreciated in his time, and it's only looking back that you see the staggering level of genius of this individual. So I think that if he were to time travel and show up and be like, I'm back and I'm gonna do more comics, he would yeah,
I love that.
I think people would be barreling down the doors of comic book stores to get those comics. I think people would be
Oh
more
yeah.
excited for him to be on the stands than ever before. Gray Malkin said, "I'd like to see what he'd do on a current Fantastic Four book." Yeah, that was a thing that I was sad about when he came back to Marvel is that he didn't go back to Fantastic Four because his Captain America in the 70s is so buck wild that like I can't even imagine how even more because FF in the 60s with him was already insane. Imagine him bringing that like 70s Kirby energy to it. It probably would have melted our brains. Um, so yeah, I would
Exactly. That's the perfect way.
yeah.
Perfect.
So I would say I think that just purely based on the fact that people appreciate him now more than they did um, in his prime, towards the end of his life, was when the appreciation for him started to build again. Sadly, it was not till the end of his life, but I think now it's at apex. It's at the highest it's ever been. So I think that would be a big shift in if he were to magically return today.
I think that's beautiful. I think you would. I think there would be so much. I don't know. It'd probably start a new comic book art renaissance a little bit. I think probably.
I think that would be incredible.
Like
and making the connection again to comic history. You talked earlier. I had this thought way back when you first mentioned the bad boys of Image Comics, as you put it. I think that those guys struck out and did Image in part because they saw how people like Jack Kirby were being treated. I think they saw, like, this is a guy who, like us, was riding high, was a superstar, was like the great, and now nobody will give him the time of day. Like, he's not being given proper credit for his work. He's not being paid fairly, and that could happen to us. And I think they had so much respect for him. Like, famously, Image gave him a deal before he died. I think he would have done more. He actually would have done comics with Image if he hadn't passed away before the deal was. I'm not sure if the deal was completely finalized, but regardless. But I think they saw and had so much respect for him, and they didn't want the same thing to happen to them.
No, exactly. And that's it. All the people that founded Image were artists, and they were top artists at the time. And a lot of them, they were all Marvel art. A lot of them, they're all Marvel artists.
Yep.
And so, like, having that influence of Jack Kirby just in the halls of Marvel at the time, you know, like his spirit was like there, and they kind of like were able to feed on that a little bit, and they saw that they stood up for themselves at that point. They're like, you know what, they saw what we were talking about. They knew what we were talking about, is what I'm saying. It's like that they were the ones. It wasn't just the writer. It wasn't just the company. It wasn't just the character itself that was driving these sales. Like, we were the ones helping out on this. Like, it's speaking for the artists. Like, we were the ones involved in these stories. We're the ones that make them look like they are today. Like, when someone thinks of Spider-Man, when someone thinks of the X-Men, that's us.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's us. Like, we're in their minds. So yeah, it's a really, I don't know. I like it. I think it's a beautiful thing for sure.
Definitely. Gray Malkin brought up a great point. Isn't that happening with that new company Substack? Yes and no. Because I think you just made a really great point that I want to really highlight here, that the Image revolution was artist driven. Because like you said, like McFarlane, Liefeld, Lee, Portacio, like all those dudes were like, to quote the meme, we're the ones selling the records. They're coming to see me.
Yeah.
They knew, like, we're the brand, right? Like, we're the ones getting the recognition, and we deserve better. So that was artist driven. I feel like, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Substack is writer driven. It's writers who are making the move to Substack, which I almost wish, I'm happy for those guys. I almost wish they were doing an Image thing. I almost wish and not saying they go to Image, saying they were like, we do our own publisher. Whether it's all digital, whether it's, through comics, I don't know, maybe like something starting on Comixology Unlimited, I don't know. But I almost wish they were doing something more collaboratively in their own space.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts? Yeah.
The whole thing with Substack, and because you're right. As soon as you said that, I was just mentally going through everyone that I've heard is going over to Substack, and I think, oh wait, no, Scotty Young's an artist. Yeah, but he's a writer now. Like, he mainly does a lot of writing. Like, it's primarily writers, and like Chip Zdarsky, which he started out as an artist, but like now he's primarily a writer.
Right.
I think, it's definitely like a writing renaissance a little bit, because like I think I mentioned before, like, these are all like professional writers now, right? That's what they do. Like, it's not also being like the marketing team and the business part of it. Like, I mean, they have their own personal businesses, of course they do. Like, but like their passion is behind the writing and storytelling, and that's where their skills lie. And so having that kind of like that driving force, exactly. I think that's a really cool comparison, actually. I didn't really think about that. It's very much like the early 90s Image artist revolution kind of thing in a way. Now that you point that out, I would have liked, they should have started their own company. That's what they should have done. Like,
and I
What are
want to
they
clarify.
doing?
I want to clarify for Gray Malkin here because they're asking that's what they're doing, aren't they? Referring to starting their own company? No, because Substack is already an existing company. It's an already existing company that up until this point did not produce comic book content. They were a newsletter service, a newsletter hub ostensibly, that had a pay system, so that way it's mostly been used by like journalists, authors, things like that. And over the last like year and a half or so, they've made a big push to get comic book creators on there, and now they're going to also start producing digital comics content. So Substack is a is a company, but it's not founded by these comic creators in the same way that Image was. Like Image was founded by those comic creators, and because of that, they were comics first, which is the thing that I know myself and others have been kind of skeptical and concerned about with Substack. Is it's not a comic company. It's a newsletter company that's now also going to be producing comics. And then 32 Pages says, how do they market their content if they go through Substack? They kind of just have to do it themselves. I mean, through their social media and whatnot, which is also why it's better for people who have a brand already, like your Chip Zdarsky's, like your James Tynion the Fourths, than for like a newcomer to the indie comic scene.
Yeah, and the thing with Substack's putting a lot of money into it, where they're funding these creators to come over, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing I like about Substack doing this is that where Image, if you put your image, if you write over an Image or Boom or any of these other independent companies, like you do keep the rights to your characters and your stories, but you don't have the publishing rights. Like there's other smaller things you don't get by going these. At Substack, you get everything. Like
Yeah.
if Chip Zdarsky writes a comic over at Substack, he can then it's going to be on. He can promote it and put it out however he wants digitally, and then he can also take it and put it over at like Boom or Image and have it printed over there if they work out a deal, physically printed over there.
Right.
So like they can be physically printed all they want. This isn't going to be a physical printed store. So like I know we're getting super sidetracked, but
No, because I think this all connects back to Kirby's legacy in one way or another.
Yeah, because I mean, it can end up like one way or the other. I've been asked like a lot about what this might do to the comic book industry, and like I don't know, I see it being very much one of two ways. Either we're going to get another renaissance of like indie books, where these comic book creators are going to have a lot of initial success online, and then they're going to be able to print their books through any of the indie printer publishers that they have, and we're going to see this big revolution of printed books, because that's how it was during the past like 2.5 years. Digital sales have gone down considerably, where printed sales have gone up considerably.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's weird. But it's the same thing with like manga too. Printed manga has gone up like considerably, or online sales have gone at least stayed stagnant. But or the other end of the spectrum, because right now a lot of people that I talk to, digital is great for someone who's not close to a comic book store or it can't afford comics on a weekly or even a monthly basis. So digital is great in that aspect. But a lot of people that buy comics on a regular basis don't like the format for it so far. But if they put a lot of money into this and it works, because it's their money, it's the writer's money at that point, so they don't have to go print it somewhere. They can just be exclusively digital, and then we might get a digital renaissance where printing might go down. If we see that, then the big two, Marvel and DC, the legacy of Kirby, like they've been wanting, the companies themselves, so AT&T and Disney have been wanting to stop printed media forever, but they keep selling, so they're like, well, we can't stop it, and so we're making money off it, so we'll keep it going. But the moment I feel like they see that digital is like outpacing, they're gonna cut them. They're gonna cut them and go strictly digital, and just to save some money, of course. But I think that would be a big shame. But to tie back into Kirby, because like I don't know, having that art in front of you, because when you buy a comic book, at least this is my philosophy. When you're buying a comic book, when you're buying a trade paperback, you're buying a piece of art as well. You're buying that art, you're enjoying, because I got customers come up to me all the time, and I'm like, oh my god, this story is great. How do you enjoy it? And they get like a shy and everything. They're like, I don't really read it. I just get it for the art. I mean, like, awesome. That's great. Like, it's literally half the medium. You're literally buying a piece of art. If you don't read it, whatever. Like, enjoy the art, please do. Which I think that's why I love comics so much. Where, like, it's the greatest in between books and movies, right? It's
Sure.
it's such an amazing middle ground that anyone can really jump into, and I think I truly believe that, and it's I think Jack Kirby would have as well. I think
Yeah,
he's such a storyteller. Like, he's not just an artist; he's a storyteller for sure. And, like, I think there's a fine distinction. There's a lot of professional artists out there, and but I think it takes a little bit more to be that kind of storyteller, and you can
absolutely.
tell that from his handling and his love for the characters.
Absolutely. There's a lot blown up in my chat right now that I wanted to talk about real fast. Yeah, to a couple of folks brought up the point about Substack like being a potentially good long-term play. Yeah, I know I probably sound cynical about it, and I think it's really just because I I want
Same.
what's
I'm
best.
very wary about it.
Yeah,
I'm very wary.
at the end of the day, this is a medium of art that I love so much that I don't want to see these people, these creators who put their heart and soul into it and constantly get screwed over, not get the recognition that they deserve. Like, I'm rooting for it, but I'm also just like worried for them too. It's the like you and going back to the idea of Kirby's legacy, like again, the treatment of creators has not really improved significantly since Kirby's time. We it was so ironic that the Substack news for all those creators happened pretty much the same week that article came out about the various Marvel and DC writers getting the like $5,000 checks from the
Yeah.
parent companies for the way they influence the movies, which
Yeah.
is
You're welcome.
absurd.
Thank you for making us over $1 billion. Here's your $5,000 check.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. So it's like,
I
yeah, of
mean,
course these guys are going to Substack after seeing that. Of course that's what they're doing. Because they know that if they strike gold with a concept, like Winter Soldier, for example, if they strike gold with something and then down the line it gets adapted into a multi-million or billion-dollar movie, they're not going to see any
yeah.
real compensation for that idea.
Nope.
Yeah.
It's just such a shame. And yeah, I do. You understand. Thank you. Yes, you get it. I'm all along the same lines as you. Like, I'm so wary of Substack just because of the history. Like, I like the idea that anyone can speak their mind on it, but like there does come some like responsibility by the platform, and I think
Sure,
I like
sure.
what a
Yeah.
lot of I like what a lot of creators are doing. I forget who it was. I think was it Sidarsky said that a lot he's going to donate a lot of his
Yes, it was a Darkseid.
proceeds.
Yes, yes. And I
And
think
yeah, Sidarsky,
Saladin,
yeah,
I believe Saladin Ahmed said he was going to do something similar. Yes.
yeah. Which is I love that. I'm glad they were able to do something like that. But I also think if Substack's gonna really push this, they need to also do something along the lines too. Like,
Right.
if they're bringing in all these new these crowds of people that want to be telling their stories, like, it needs to be kind of a, I don't know, a pretty open place for everybody to
Right.
feel it, because
Right.
that's my fear, because Substack has a has a pretty negative connotation nowadays when
Yeah.
now it's blown up. Like, there's a broad range of stuff on Substack for
Which,
sure, but they're highlighting the negative stuff, which
right.
I understand why, and so that's why a lot of people are very wary about it, because you're going to get a lot of these creators right now. Their independent works highlight a lot of these the groups that don't really get a lot of voices too much,
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
so a lot of these creators do that and bring and highlight and give voice to a lot of these groups. And so if you're bringing them to this platform, I mean, I don't want to scare people away. I don't want people to feel like this is what comics are all about. Like, so that's another reason why I'm
Yeah,
scared of
and
Substack as
it's
well.
it's it's a it's a complex issue because Substack is not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's not like shoot, I'm blanking on the name of it, but there was that social media platform that like came and went and like crashed and burned pretty hard, that was promoting itself as like the free speech zone and whatever it was.
Oh,
Um, was it like
yeah,
Gab
yeah,
or something like that? I don't remember the exact name of it, but
yeah,
regardless,
yeah. I think I know what you're talking about.
with something like that, it's just like open season, right? Like it's just free range. It's like Twitter. Like
Yeah,
you can see anyone's tweets. With Substack, it's like you're not just seeing everyone's material. You're only seeing the people who
Yes.
you are specifically subscribed to, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
there is a distinction there. But I also like I have so much respect for Zdarsky and Ahmed and anyone else who said like I'm going to donate my proceeds. Sorry, my mom was waving me. I'm going to donate my proceeds to groups that are in the marginalized communities that unfortunately are targeted by certain people on Substack. But at the same time, like it's unfair to those creators that they have to go to this company that's got morally questionable practices because their options are, well, I either go to Marvel and DC who are never going to pay me very well, or I go to Substack who is going to pay me well but has horrendous practices. Right? It's so unfair the position that they've been stuck in.
Exactly, and they have to use their own proceeds, right? Which they could be using
right.
to promote the medium more, and instead of playing this like catch-up game, this medium, this marketing cleanup game. But not to downplay the contributions. I think this is great. I agree with you. This is phenomenal what they're doing from the kindness of their own hearts. They, like I said, they could be putting the money in other places to doing this, but they're choosing to do this, and I think this is phenomenal for them. But yes, to your point, they shouldn't be alone in that.
Right.
They shouldn't be the only ones doing that.
Right.
That's a big fear for me with Substack.
Yeah, you would want 32 pages said this in the chat that hopefully, like, if enough intellectual drain occurs from the mainstream companies, it'll put pressure on them to change. I would hope that would happen. I would hope Substack gets the message, but they seem pretty adamant about it being a free speech zone, which we don't have to get into the paradox of tolerance in this discussion or anything. But
if I can get on my soapbox, then to counter, not to counter that, but to further that, then like what will change these companies' minds usually is the dollar.
Yeah,
so the more people that love these and support this stuff and that want to help out, that want to help the smaller voices that don't get heard too much, then we go to Substack, we go to these creators, and we help support. The more influence and more traffic this site gets from those particular creators, like the company's just going to see it and be like, okay,
absolutely.
well, maybe we should support this more. So that the power is with us. We just got to do it. We just got to go for it.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'll be supporting these creators. I'm excited to see what they do.
Definitely.
There's as much freedom. They have so much more freedom now.
Like, yes. And to pivot it back, the freedom that Kirby was given towards the end of his life when he had his run at 80s, when he had his brief run in the 80s with places like Pacific Comics. And Tolliver said, "Are y'all talking about Substack?" Yeah, we got into Substack.
yeah. How'd you guess?
but again, it's like that fight that Kirby had to go through, that fight for proper compensation, that fight for trying to get paid, is a fight that we're still having 30 years later. It is again, you see the history of comics through Kirby's legacy. And sadly, I think, well, I shouldn't say it's his most lasting, but part of his legacy, and in addition to creating all these characters that we love, is also the ugly side of comics, which is that creators are not given the fair treatment and the recognition that they deserve very often.
I agree, and I completely agree with that. That was phenomenally well said.
Thank you.
Which leads into, like, yeah, the creators aren't getting enough, but also like what I was saying before about like the marginalized groups not being able to get their voices heard as well either. Because I mean, we're talking about the creator of Black Panther, right? Yeah. We're talking about the creator of Black Panther, and like what he had to do to get Black Panther made, which is crazy. Like Marvel wanted to make it like Black Panther like a white guy. They wanted they didn't think it would sell. They wanted to put a mask on him, right? They wanted to put a mask on him so people would think that that they couldn't guess his race too much. But they didn't think it would sell very well in the South.
Right.
If people knew he was black.
Yeah.
People knew he was black. And so but so then Jack Kirby, sure, he put the mask on the covers, but if you look inside the book, most of the time he doesn't even have his mask on. Like, that was the creative choice of Jack Kirby. He was just like, if I have to do this, fine, I'll do it for the cover. But at the end of the day, this is who this character is.
Right.
And if they don't like it, then that's it. And which I love. I think that's great.
I was thinking about Black Panther today, in particular when I was making the video to stitch with yours about my favorite characters, and I was kind of like, that first issue, for anybody watching who hasn't read it, that first issue, Black Panther kicks the crap out of Fantastic Four. He like single-handedly, as the kids would say nowadays, Black Panther solos the entire Fantastic Four, right? He like beats them all in a fight
Without a
without
challenge.
breaking a sweat. And all I could think was, could you imagine if Twitter and social media as we know it today existed back then? How many just like dweebs on the internet would be like, oh, they're pushing an agenda by having Black Panther beat the entire Fantastic Four to fight. I can't believe all this forced diversity. And it's like the fact that these people are claimed to be such fans, and I'm putting that in the biggest quotes, such
Please.
fans of these stories and characters, and yet they don't see the history of it, and they don't see how absurd they're being when they say these things about forced diversity and all those other ridiculous statements. It's just so funny to me. And yeah, it's just hilarious. Kirby was so ahead of his time.
Yeah, no, like I mean, obviously we still get that today. I mean, when people like whenever they like change the race of a pre-existing character, right? They were like, oh, why don't they just make their own? He did. He made Black Panther. Like, there's no one else like him before, and people still complain. Like and just to having this character that's ridiculously smart. He's the king of his country. He's the pinnacle of like a superhero, right?
Right.
Like, wealthy beyond all reason, and like people were still complaining about. Like, it's so ridiculous. And but side note too, like when you mentioned like he just he soloed the Fantastic Four. I loved it. The Marvel Mightiest Heroes cartoon from a little bit ago, when they first introduced Black Panther, he does the same thing with the Avengers. He sneaks in Avengers Mansion, he just wrecks the entire Avengers team by himself. And so like that's Black Panther. That's T'Challa though. Like,
and this predates like prep time Batman. This predates that whole like,
oh yeah,
Batman could beat anybody with prep time. Like, this idea of a character who single-handedly, through just like determination, skill, and a little bit of help from tech and other things of that nature, can lay waste to superpowered characters, was not a thing anybody was doing until Jack Kirby at that moment.
Do you know how often Batman got his butt whooped? Like, he did not have a contingency plan until the 80s. Like,
right.
That wasn't a thing. Like, he was just going by the edge of his feet most of
the time. He was having a hard
time
with Polka Dot
Man
in the 60s.
Back
like,
in the day.
Ridiculous.
And don't get me wrong, I love that. That's phenomenal. But like, no, the whole I'm Batman thing didn't show up until a lot later. So
right.
I completely agree. Black Panther really kind of like planned it out. Like, he had the plan. He thought about it. He was smart. Like,
yes,
that's what a lot of people didn't. A lot of superheroes didn't really, especially back on this Gold and Silver Age. Like, they didn't have a lot of superheroes that were using their minds to outthink things. Like, we talk about Mr. Miracle, we talk about Mr. Fantastic, we talk about Black Panther. These Jack Kirby characters, they used not only their muscles but their brains to think through these situations. Like, you don't need to be ridiculously strong. If you can outthink, if you can outmaneuver, outwit someone, like, you're going to come out on top. Like,
absolutely.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you look like.
Two funny comments. Tolliver Street saying, please, that discourse. I think it's kind of funny thinking about it, because I'm like, I feel like Jack Kirby unintentionally invented the who would win in a fight discourse that now exhausts me every day of my life. And Gray Malkin said...
I think he knew.
Gray Malkin said, see, even the Batman stole from the black man, LOL. Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems that way.
I mean...
So actually, and I wanted to kind of take a hard left a little bit here, because to get into a topic that I wanted to just kind of like not rant, but like kind of just discuss with you a little bit. We're now finally seeing an expression of Jack Kirby on the silver screen that we haven't really gotten in the Eternals film. And what I mean by that is, we've obviously gotten all of these characters and films that are characters that he co-created in some way. But I think, and this is in my opinion, largely due to the Stan Lee cameos. I think in the public consciousness, those characters are seen as Stan Lee creations, right? Um,
Yeah.
Funny enough, yesterday Dave Baker had a funny moment where we were talking about how the fact that like Stan Lee gets a cameo in the Captain America film, even though Stan Lee didn't have anything to do with the creation of Captain America and was an intern
Nothing.
basically at Marvel Comics at that time.
Yep.
But now with Eternals, this is the first one of these films that we're getting that is 100% Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
And in my heart of hearts, I would have loved for it to have been New Gods. It still breaks my heart that that movie's not happening. But
I know. Wow. Seriously though.
I know.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into that. But I want to hear what you think. Like, do you think this film could be a major tipping point in what I said a moment ago, that recognition for Kirby? Do you think this could be an opportunity for people to finally say, Jack Kirby is someone we need to be giving more recognition to?
Shooby Doober, it says we are getting Eternals. I consider it a win. Yes, we are. Yes, I agree with him considerably. Like just getting the movie in general is going to be a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you asked this. I have been a little scared about it, to be honest with you. Like I haven't voiced it too much because I'm not trying to give that fear life a little bit, put that out in the universe. But I am a little scared that they are going to underdo it, underrepresent him a little bit. I'm hoping not. I really hope I'm wrong.
Sure.
Whenever I say stuff like this, I always hope I'm wrong. Like I really do. And
Right.
I want to see that influence of him in the actual, like I'm hoping obviously the director and the writers and the creative teams on these movies can obviously do whatever they want to try to fit off to fit in their Marvel Universe box. But I'm hoping that they also take a little bit of time to look at the source material. I mean, they obviously had to, but like to not look at it, to represent the source material a little bit. And it doesn't even need to be in an overt way. Just something that really kind of identifies Jack Kirby and his contributions.
Sure.
Whether it's his, because I think a little bit too, because I got excited about it with the newest trailer where you see Icarus with his eye beams and everything. That's a lot of the angles they're using on it.
The celestial, that shot of the celestial was like
very Kirby-esque. I was like, okay, I'm getting excited. I don't want to get my hopes up. I'm getting excited, and so like I'm hoping that they kind of recognize him more, and I really want people to kind of get on board with not downplay Stan Lee. It's not one or the other. It's really not.
Right.
Stan Lee did his stuff. I'm sure Jack Kirby also did some stuff that we're all human. Like we all make mistakes. But I want people like I think yes, you said perfectly mentioned before. I want them to get at least on par.
Right.
You know, with recognition. I think that would be phenomenal. I think
because
I think this might be a really good stage to do it. I think this might be a good stage to do it.
Because I just know someone's gonna say something about Stan Lee creating the Eternals, and I'm gonna lose my mind.
Yeah, no,
it's definitely gonna happen.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm so scared. Like in the middle of a theater too. I'm gonna hear it right behind me. Man, thank God for Stan Lee. No, sir. Like I'm gonna throw my popcorn in the middle of the movie theater. It's not gonna be good.
Yeah. I have similar feelings to you, but I think there's two things about it that excite me. One, I definitely think that most recent trailer. Well, three things. The first thing being the hat Salma Hayek wears looks like a Jack Kirby ass hat, which I love.
Oh yeah.
There's a shot in the trailer where she's in her full costume. She's got this like really tall hat on. I'm like, that's a Jack Kirby ass hat. Jack Kirby loved a big hat on somebody, so that's good first step. But
going for it, man. They're going for it.
The second thing is the second trailer. The visuals of what we're seeing so far, I think, have been really interesting and intriguing. You've got, like you were saying, the shot of the celestial. You've got there's elements of it that are feeling like very Jack Kirby. But what I also find very interesting is that there's a spirit of Jack Kirby being captured. And what I mean by that, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. So first question I want to ask you, Do you know anything? Like, have you seen Chloe Zhao's other films? The woman who's the director of Eternals.
I think so.
She
What
did.
what was she?
So her three films are songs my brother taught me, Nomadland, and why am I blanking on the second one? The Rider. Those are her three
No
films.
Man. Yeah, I've seen
Okay.
No Man. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So when she was announced as the director, so I'm a comic book nerd, but like my other nerdy passion is like film stuff. So like when Martin
It's
Scorsese,
crazy how those cross over. Like
yeah,
it's really
yeah.
crazy.
But those, it's also funny too because there's like every time like Martin Scorsese's like Marvel films aren't cinema. There's like a war, and I feel like my parents are fighting. I'm like, please
Yeah,
stop making like bones.
I felt the same way, man. Like, because I was
Because
like, but why? Why would you say that? Like,
because there's a part of me that's like, oh, come on, Martin, don't say that. And then when Marvel fans are like, oh, Martin Scorsese only makes gangster movies, I'm like, Kundun, go watch Kundun, you plebeians.
yeah,
Like,
no, seriously though. Like,
I like Scorsese's the only
oh.
one who's allowed to say anything like that because he's Martin friggin' Scorsese. Like,
he
he's
gets his,
allowed.
he got his pass in the mail. He's fine.
Yeah,
He already
yeah,
got it. It's good.
big time, big time. But regardless, but I think that what's interesting about her being the director is her movies. When she was announced, I was like, this woman makes like cinema verite films about like regular people who live in the American Midwest. Like they are
Yeah,
the most polar opposite of Jack Kirby you could possibly imagine. But at the
yeah,
same time, I think there's something in the creative spirit of Jack Kirby of letting someone like that who has a unique vision go wild. Because that,
yeah,
to me, is the heart of what Jack Kirby is all about. Someone with an imagination and a vision being allowed freedom to create. And the thing that got me in the trailer was like seeing these like gods living among human beings, and there's that part where they're like, if you love something you fight for it, and I'm like, that is a Jack Kirby ethos if I've ever heard one. That is like an
yeah,
expression of a Jack Kirby idea if I've ever heard one. And to me, I think more than anything, we talked earlier, like Darkseid is not a thing that you punch. When people make Darkseid just a thing that you punch, you miss the point of Jack Kirby's story. Seeing that in the trailer and
yeah.
seeing some of these ideas, I'm like, if nothing else, I think she gets the ideas that Jack Kirby was going for. And that is so important.
Yes, I completely agree because that's as much as like I loved like the layer stories. I love the stories about kind of a realistic kind of like view on life. How sometimes things just don't work out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of mainstream writers nowadays definitely make stories like that, and that's important. I feel having
Sure.
stories like that are important to keep it kind of grounded in yourself, especially true stories. Especially like there's been a huge renaissance in like autobiographical memoirs in graphic novel form. Like that's
Yeah,
real,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
life,
yeah,
right? And so there's a lot of that. But Kirby really threw in that what we were talking about earlier, just that hope wins all. The good versus evil
yeah,
can be a thing. You
yeah,
can believe in that, right? There's real life aspects to his work for sure, and that's what keeps him grounded. That's what keeps you grounded as the reader in his work. You see yourself. That's what I'm saying. The art draws you in. You're now inside his world with his art style. But once you're there, you feel everything. You
right,
feel everything that
right,
his expressions, that the characters give off, the storylines. It gives you hope, but it's not unrealistic. It's not
right,
unrealistic hope.
right.
It's not a facade to hide reality. It's just like, yes, this bad stuff is happening. Yeah, we get it, but you got to keep going, and this is how you do it. And I
Absolutely.
love it. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is again like a Kirby ethos that good can triumph
Mhm.
over evil in spite of no matter how much evil might be surrounding you. Tolliver Street in my chat, I feel like she can really humanize the gods as characters. Yeah, absolutely, and I think you definitely
Yeah,
see glimpses of that in the trailer. And again, like that's a Kirby thing too. Like he loved taking godlike characters and putting them in relatable, humane settings where no matter how big they were, like no matter how big Orion got, he still had those like base insecurities about who he was as a person. He had vanity. Like he used the mother box to make him more handsome, so you couldn't see the
yeah,
like grisly visage of Darkseid in his face. Like that's such a human thing for a guy who's like burly, strong, like I can destroy anything. He doesn't want you to see his
yeah,
true identity. and that is such a
Yeah.
humane thing that's expressed there. I want to see two things here. Gray Malkin said, throwing out the idea of like great directors taking on comic characters. One of the things they suggested was Namor directed by Guillermo del Toro. Don't say that, because then it won't happen, and I'll be disappointed, because that sounds incredible. Cinema and comics are
Don't
a
throw that
great
in the universe.
blend, but they have to be taken seriously on both sides. I agree. There's an Entertainment Weekly article that came out about Eternals recently, and one of the things that kept coming up was like Kevin Feige just like praising Chloe Zhao's like love of the comic, that she was apparently the one who came to them and was like, I want to do Eternals. And that's crazy to me, because I don't think Jack Kirby even wanted to do Eternals that badly. I think Jack Kirby kind of wished he was. I think Jack Kirby, when he wrote Eternals, kind of wished he was still doing New Gods. So like,
I'm sure it did.
yeah, it's very surprising to me that she said that. So I would love to. I hope when the film comes out, there's more interviews with her talking about the comics and her sort of like inspiration for them, because I'd love to hear more of her thoughts on that. Yeah.
Oh, totally. There's a TikTok I was just watching a second ago before you jumped on. He was going on. I forget exactly what it was about, but I was gonna stitch it. And a lot of people were a lot of big like movie creators and directors and writers were just like, we can't take. Why is everyone? Why, if you make a superhero movie, does it automatically get discredited? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can have an amazing movie and also have a superhero. Like, they're saying, like, just because you're making a superhero movie doesn't. They're like having a superhero, saying that it's a superhero, saying that it's a Marvel movie or something like that. They a lot of directors, when they're doing their superhero movies, they won't mention it. They're like, yeah, we're making this like fighting awesome action movie. Well, it's a superhero movie. Like, don't discredit that genre. Like, it speaks and identifies to a lot of people, and there's so much depth
Right.
to it. And I don't think people need to be afraid, or unfortunately, there's still that connotation that superheroes are for kids. Like,
Right.
it's a kids thing. Like, and not that that's necessarily bad that it's a kids thing. I think a better term would be it's an all ages thing. It's an all ages thing.
Absolutely.
Like, and you can connect on in so many different levels. You really can. And I think that's a huge important thing to take. And I think a lot of big name creators, especially in the movie industry, need to kind of get off that little high horse a little bit. In my opinion, like, just because
Yeah.
it's a superhero movie doesn't mean it's not an artistic movie.
Sure.
Doesn't mean you
Absolutely.
can't
And
artistic liberty. Like,
it's funny you say that, because it's a perfect parallel for again the way these comic creators were treated, because their art form was seen
yeah,
as lesser. It was seen as disposable entertainment for children, but it's like you still had to have artistic ability and skill to create these works of art in the first place, right? Like it's not like this was something that was easy to do just because it's for children. You still have to have a gift for storytelling and craftsmanship in order to tell these stories, regardless of what age range it's for. And that deserves respect, and that deserves credit. It's not easy to make a comic. It's not easy to make a movie. So like, I don't care
no,
who
it's
the
not.
audience is. There's a level of craft and effort that goes into it that deserves respect and to be treated like art.
And yeah, not only definitely for the creators, like that, like we were talking about, for they don't get enough of it, but also for the people that enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like, also the people that it means something to. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of, like, that just throws their joy of it. A lot of people respect this stuff. Like, a big distinction between the two big companies, Marvel, and these I might not sound like a compliment, but I think I mean it that way. Marvel is about superheroes with day jobs, right? You see yourself in their shoes, right?
Right.
Spider-Man saves the day, but also, he has to keep up with school and work at
Right.
the
Right.
Daily Bugle and stuff like that. The X-Men, right? They're all saving the world, but at the same time, they're having to take on the challenge of bigotry and hatred, right? At
Right.
the same time, right?
Right.
They're people, they're superheroes with day jobs, so you can identify with that.
Right.
On the other side, DC, there's these gods, right? Next to you don't see yourself in their position, but you look up to what they represent,
Right. Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And both are extremely valid. Like,
Yes.
both are extremely valid and bring a lot of joy to people. And I think, going back to Jack Kirby, I think he touched on both of them so well, especially when he was in each of the when he was participating in each of the companies.
Totally.
Like, he took characters like Allfather and Darkseid and Mr. Miracle, these literal new gods. Like, right, they're the old gods, like Zeus and Hades, right? These are the new gods. These are on the same level. I think people forget that they're on the same level, right? And so, like, having those beings with the same being written in a way, the story does show the story of good versus evil, and that there can be hope against that darkness. Like,
Right.
that's something you can identify with. That they'll stand up for you. Like, there can be something. If they're doing it, we can do it. Kind of.
Absolutely.
Where
Well said.
Marvel, yeah, it's I don't know. It's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff.
So some final thoughts here. What do you feel like
Yeah.
is Kirby's ultimate impact on the comic book industry as we know it today? Like, what do you see if someone on the street was like, sum up Jack Kirby's legacy for me? Like, what would you say? It's a big question.
I think Jack Kirby is a big question because there's so much. But I think that's it. Jack Kirby has done so much that there isn't one thing that he touched. Without Jack Kirby, and he's one of the pillar stones of comics. He's one of the pillars that keeps comics, that's lifted up comics to what we know today. You were right. If you take him away, that question we had earlier, you can't take him away from the past. Like, if you take Jack Kirby away, comics don't exist anymore. Like, especially in the way they are today. Like, they would be dramatically different if at all. They might not have even survived. You know, like, if they couldn't have evolved. And so Jack Kirby, not only to me, but a lot of comic book people, a lot of comic book people that enjoy comic books and their stories, he means the world. Whether you know who he is or not, he means the world to you.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful sentiment, that there are so many people out there who don't know his name, and yet you have certainly been touched by his work in some way, whether it's through the movies or cartoons or whatever it might be. He has had an influence.
You, sir, I need to know what your thoughts are on that same question. That's a beautiful question.
I think it all goes back to that idea of he is the history of comics. I think that he was someone who was constantly, like, I have now had 2.5-hour comic book conversations, I should say, about Jack Kirby, and I still don't feel like I've talked about enough, right? Like,
I agree.
When you look at the breadth and the depth of his work, whether it's like the many characters that he created, the way he invented the romance comic in the 50s when the superheroes weren't popular, like, to invent an entire genre of something is enough for one creator to do as his only legacy. But he continued to do more beyond that. And I think the fact that I don't want to romanticize the fact that he was undervalued, because I don't think that's fair to him. But I think that he was someone who loved to create. And he was so motivated by the idea of creation, and so motivated by the idea of his imagination and wanting to put that on paper and share it with people, even though he wasn't getting the respect and the recognition he deserved. I think there's something beautiful in that. And I think there's something to take to heart in that, which is like simply that, in life, there's a lot of things that we're never really going to know the impact we had. There are so many like moments where like we're not going to know if we mattered to certain people. We're not going to know if certain things that we did had an impact or meant something. And in those moments, I think of like, I'm getting emotional. Sorry. I think of like just how much Jack Kirby means. Man, I think of how much Jack Kirby means to me and how much he means to so many people. And he'll never know me, and he'll never know so many of these people, but he touched our lives. And that is a lesson we can all take, that we might not know the way we're going to affect everyone, and the way we affect people might not be appreciated, but that doesn't mean we don't matter. And that doesn't mean we don't have an impact on the world. And I think that's the lesson I take away.
And I know we're getting close, but because that was amazing, man. Thank you for that. That was like, because of that. Yeah. To touch on it didn't just stop at comics, because we were talking about also, because of, we were talking about like how like crazy poetic it was that Chadwick Boseman died on his birthday, right? Yeah. And what did Chadwick Boseman do for the African American community and stuff like that? Like he inspired so many kids, like especially so many African American kids, but like also kids of every race. Like
Yeah.
because of what Chadwick Boseman did for the character of Black Panther, we wouldn't have gotten Chadwick Boseman as a Black Panther without Jack Kirby, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Absolutely.
because of that, and because of what Jack Kirby gave us, Chadwick Boseman was able to take that and inspire so many more people,
Yeah.
not just comic book fans, but just communities and people in general. Just because Jack Kirby took a pen to paper,
Yeah.
one day and
Yeah.
was like, you know what, this seemed like a cool idea.
Yeah.
And now we have so many kids like see themselves like that's one of my biggest things with comics, and that's what I love about it, and that's what I try to push so much, is that I think it's immensely important that you see yourself in the comic books that you read and the stories that you tell. And a lot of people are very much not represented in comics. And I think having Chadwick Boseman be able to stand up and be like, listen, you're here. Look, you can be here too.
Yeah.
And so like having kids be able to do that's like immensely important. Like that was huge to me. And
Absolutely.
because of what Jack Kirby did, it allowed Chadwick Boseman to stand up and fight for that. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah. And again, it's that weird like domino effect. Like it's we do something and that goes out into the universe and that affects someone and then that person has an impact on someone else and we're all like connected in these strands that we can't see, but they are there and they matter and they're important and they make us all matter to each other, and that's a beautiful thing. It really is.
I agree. Well, thank you for putting this on, man. This was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, like talking with me about this. I'm thrilled we finally got a chance to like talk in person after talking through like TikTok comments primarily for the last couple months. But this is awesome. I always love hearing you. If there's anybody watching who follows me and doesn't follow Mike for the love of comics, please, for the love of comics, go follow him because he does amazing stuff. And you are a retailer. You do work in the comics industry. You work in a comic shop, so you can keep people very up to date on the new stuff that's coming out. I love watching your what's coming out this week videos because it keeps me up to date if I forget something's coming out. So you are a huge lifeline for me too, and I appreciate that. So it was awesome talking to you.
No, man, it's creators like you though, man. Like I feel like I definitely try to keep people informed, but you like give comics like another depth that I feel like my videos don't even touch on. Like the way you dissect a lot of these characters in these stories and your recommendations are phenomenal. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Same with any of my followers. Like if you're seeing this, go follow Captain Comics Rex. Like it's just on another level, man. Like
I really appreciate it. Like thank you, man.
Of course. Yeah, please never stop, man. Let's do this again. Let's do something else.
Definitely. I actually have some thoughts on more lives that I'd like to do, and you're definitely one of the people I'm going to reach out to for that. So keep an eye on your I just dropped my mouse. Keep an eye on your messages, and we'll definitely talk more about that.
Please, yes.
All right. Well, thank you to everybody who's still watching. Happy birthday to Jack Kirby. And yeah, catch you later. Thank you so much.
All right. I'll see you guys later.
Bye-bye.